I'm not got a great head for heights. So I said, which way shall I go here? And he said, yeah, now go to your left. And of course, Alistair is hopeless with left and right. So I took about 3 more steps and he said, no, not that left.
Kia ora, and welcome to The Tramping Life, a podcast about hiking in Aotearoa, New Zealand, or as we call it here, tramping. I'm John T, and in each episode I chat with people who share a passion for exploring this incredible country. We'll hear about the tracks they love, the huts they return to, the lessons they've learned, and what keeps them heading back into the bush. My guest today is Celia Wade-Brown, Green Party MP, former Mayor of Wellington, founder of the Wairarapa Walking Festival, and a lifelong tramper, including walking the Te Araroa Trail. Celia brings a real passion for the outdoors and sustainable living, and I'm delighted to welcome her to the podcast.
Kia ora, John T. Greetings to you and to your listeners. And it's a bit of a drizzly day here at the edge of the Tararuas Forest Park, but doesn't stop me getting out.
As I say, it doesn't come across on the podcast, but Celia's shared her view and she looks onto the Tararuas, so I'm very jealous of her being able to do that. So I like to start at the beginning. So I'm interested in, what are some of your earliest memories of being outdoors?
I grew up in England in the middle of London. Going for walks with my mum would be going to Little Venice before it was fashionable, when the canals were still pretty smelly, but still really interesting. Going to the great big parks. In London, we didn't have a garden at all, but we lived in a council flat. But the wonderful gardens, Kensington Gardens, St James's Park and so on. So those are quite big spaces for a little one. And then my mum's family was from the Lake District. So summer holidays, whenever we could get up there by train with lots of changes, we'd go up there and do some tramping up in the Lake District.
As a former POM myself, I can relate to that experience. And then when did you start heading into the New Zealand bush?
I moved over here in the 80s and I still remember just taking a walk at the back of Eastbourne up into the East Harbour Regional Park. And just standing there and smelling the bush and thinking, this smells totally different to the English forest. And I don't know a single tree, because my mum was quite a keen amateur botanist. So I'd expect to know what the trees were, what the flowers were, that sort of stuff. And I just stood there and thought, I don't know any of these. So I started getting to know that and just did some gentle walks around. I lived on the south coast, so walking out to Red Rocks, things like that were great. Enjoyed that. I was probably more into rafting was my big thing when I was working with some other people in IT.
And then when was your first multi-day tramp?
I think it might have been actually after we had children and we managed to escape for a long weekend and we did the Nelson Lakes in the pouring rain. Yeah, but it didn't put me off. So it wasn't that long ago. We joined the Tararuas Tramping Club in about 2001, but our first trip with them was down the Whanganui River in canoes. So we went up on the club trips, and it's only really after those sort of high adrenaline things that I got into tramping in New Zealand.
And who did you tend to tramp with? Were your family or the club or friends?
I've a lot of friends that like to walk and talk, doing things like the Southern Walkway or the City to Sea. Those are great walks. You can go quite spontaneously. You don't need to prepare too much. After we joined the tramping club, did a few walks with them, but it wasn't really until I finished being mayor that I went on many trips, because people who are working full time can't do the Wednesday walks. And I knew I wanted to do Te Araroa, which we'll come to in a minute. And I thought I better get tramping fit. So I used to go out every Wednesday for about 3 months, which was great. Alistair and I did the route burn when I was mayor. Managed to get down there just after the bookings. And we were so lucky. It had just snowed, but it was calm. And we were the only people in the huts. It was amazing.
I'm glad to hear that you did some prep for the TA. It's amazing how many books have been published about the TAs. There's lots of different kind of stories about it, and it is a pretty amazing experience. But I'm always surprised that certainly the people who've published books, they don't tend to be hardcore trampers. It tends to be people with less of a tramping background who decide to walk the length of New Zealand.
I decided I was going to stand down. I knew that the media would ask me and other people would ask me, what are you going to do after that? And to be honest, I wasn't too sure. So I thought, let's give them something to think about. I said to my husband, because a friend of ours had just done Te Araroa the year before. I said to my husband, what do you think about doing Te Araroa? And he said, in the immortal words, that would take a lot of planning. And I thought, that's not a no, so we're going. So once I'd announced it to the media, I had to do it anyway. But yeah, I did the Wednesday walks. I worked my way up from easy to easy, medium to medium, and so on. And I did something I didn't really enjoy, but given the time I had to do it, I went to the gym and lifted some weights, some shoulder weights, because it's no good just doing your tramping practice without a pack. We'd done things like the Southern Crossing. It wasn't as if we hadn't done any tramping, but we just hadn't done much. And we did it in a funny order because I couldn't start till Christmas. I was training as an English as a second language teacher, and I was trying to get fitter than I was as mayor. You go to far too many openings and celebrations, so I wasn't that fit to start with. So we started on Boxing Day 2016 and walked through quite a lot of 2017.
Are there any particular highlights or lowlights that spring to mind?
I think it was just so exciting to start it. We did the South Island first, northbound, or Nobo in the jargon, and then we went and flew to Auckland and got a friend to drive us to Cape Reinga and walked Reinga to Auckland. And then the forecasts were rubbish at that point, so we put off doing Auckland to Wellington till springtime. So, yeah, there were a few highlights. I actually found Mount Rintal pretty tricky, but I was reasonably fit by then, so I managed it. That was quite a big achievement. There was an exciting bit going up Breast Hill, which is for me, very steep, and I'm not got a great head for heights. I'm a lot better since doing Te Araroa, though. And Alistair went a little bit more competent than me at scrambling up things and has no fear of heights. So I said, which way shall I go here? And he said, yeah, now go to your left. And of course, Alistair is hopeless with left and right. So I took about 3 more steps and he said, no, not that left. I loved meditative bit of walking along 90 Mile Beach. That was actually more pleasant than one thought it might be. Seeing just a little hint of a hill in the distance becoming clearer. We were in the fortunate situation of not having to do it the totally cheapest possible way. So we stayed at Hukateri Lodge that had a hot tub, which after a couple of days walking along 90 Mile Beach is awesome. But then you get some free fun things like in the Huranui ranges, there's lots of free hot pools, natural hot pools. The trouble is they have added sandflies. It was a real mix. That's what I liked about Te Araroa. You go to little towns past. I didn't know that Southland had so many marae. I expected them in Northland, but I didn't expect them in Southland. And every town had decent milkshake and pizza, which is just what you want when you get it out of the bush.
And did you have any favourite huts along the way?
I did like Nichols' hut in the Tararuas for the views. Just amazing. There were some pretty rubbish huts. Some of the very small ones, Stoddy's hut, Shepherd's hut, some of those were pretty basic. But look, you're just glad to be horizontal and have some shelter from the rain. And actually, after having done the first 2/3 of Te Araroa, that's when we decided we could live in this little place, in our tiny home in the Tararuas, Tararua Ranges, where we built this as a holiday place. And it's about 20 square metres. And after staying in some very variable huts, we decided we could actually move here.
So how big is your place in comparison with a typical hut?
Medium. Yeah, medium. 20 square metres. A lot of it, we've got a lovely wood fire and we've got a mezzanine platform that you have to clamber up a ladder to. So it's a very well organised space.
And who did you meet on the trail? Did you meet some interesting people?
Oh, yes, we did. One of the interesting people was a young Maori woman who hadn't done tramping before. And you're quite right. There's quite a few people that start off and haven't done much tramping before. And she was much more nervous of heights than I was. And I remember coming out, must have been just before, I think, one of the big rivers. We were walking along this trail just above the river. And it was interesting because as soon as I had to help her and give her some confidence, I found that my own nervousness evaporated. So it was lovely to meet her. She ended up going on the board of the Te Araroa Auckland branch for a while. So it was great. Then there was a really fast French Canadian. He was very fast, but he often headed off in the wrong direction. For about 10 days, we'd start off at the same time and end up at the same time, and he would have gone a very interesting route.
Were there any overcrowding issues along the way?
We were fine in 2017. There's a couple of times the huts were full, but not unpleasant. We always carried a tent. Yeah, so we were fine. I understand there's some challenges now, and that's one of the reasons for bringing in the registration and the hut pass. I was very pleased when Te Araroa put in the extra water tanks on the Richmond Rangers huts, because we were okay, but there were reports in the hut books of the water running low.
You don't want to run out of water in the Richmond Ranges.
That was one of our mistakes, coming through from Ahipara, and we thought we'd be able to get over to whatever the road is in one go. And we passed this waterfall and we didn't fill up our water bags. It was getting dark. The sort of Ruru were calling and we had to just camp out, and we were really tight for water. That was a never go past a waterfall again.
It's good advice. Now, you founded the Wairarapa Walking Festival.
It's in 2017 we moved over to the Wairarapa in November, and I got involved in a few things, including the Carterton Walking and Cycling Advisory Group. And they were talking all sorts of great things about biking, which I also like. I've also done some long distance bike packing, and I still bike to Parliament every day in Wellington pretty much. And I said, "Oh, what are you doing for walking?" And I have to say they looked distinctly blank. So I said, "What about a walking festival?" And they all look enthusiastic, but they continued to look at me. So we had our first walking festival in 2021. That's right. With about 9 walks, and just in the Carterton district. And now we've expanded to have, 30 or so across the Wairarapa. And they range from looking at the outdoor carvings and spaces at the Papawai Marae, which will be just under an hour probably, and not very strenuous, but very interesting, through to I've got a 2-day tramp, and we've got wonderful sponsor is Transit Buses, so that helps you organise things hard to do otherwise. So they're going to drop us at the Waihini Road end, and we're going to walk in, stay at Totara Flats hut, which I booked, most of the bunks there, and then we walk out and get picked up at the Holdsworth Road end. So it's a really good first overnight tramp if people haven't done any before. Anyone's welcome.
And I saw a photo you shared, I think it was at Castle Point, with yourself with some migrants and refugees.
We started reaching out because if you're not careful, walking tends to be a relatively narrow demographic, and we wanted to reach out and encourage people. As you say, there are some countries where walking doesn't feel that safe, and we wanted to make sure that people felt that they could go for walks with their family. So we just did a lovely trip, again with the transit bus, out to Castle Point. I worked with the Red Cross and Marston District Council on this, and we took a whole lot of people out to Castle Point, and we walked from the car park up to the lighthouse and back. Again, a really short walk for anyone who's a serious tramper, but it is a spectacularly beautiful one, and it is somewhere that people who perhaps don't have their own car would never have got to otherwise. So it was really nice. I'm not sure that some of them didn't enjoy the picnic more, but we did both.
So should there be a Wellington Walking Festival?
I'm sure there should. There's quite a lot of walks in the Wellington Heritage Festival. We did a walk for the suffrage, the 120th suffrage walk. That was with Living Streets, and Living Streets Aotearoa is more of the urban walking advocacy. I founded that in 2002. So I see a gap, I jump in.
You keep busy, although as an MP now, I suspect that's quite a busy job. And there's a few things the government have done which have made things maybe in the outdoors a bit more challenging. So I'm interested in your views around some of the proposals about outdoor education and how that might play out.
I think it's a great shame that this government is proposing to take outdoor education as a subject off the senior curriculum. I think that outdoor education engages people in a way that other subjects sometimes don't. And it's not only for students. The problem solving, the planning, the geography, the risk assessment, the first aid, all of those sorts of things are pretty basic life skills that we should all have. And In a country that relies quite heavily on tourism, what's the pathway to being a guide, whether it's a ski guide, a rafting guide, a hiking guide, kayak education, look at the Murchison outdoor whitewater stuff. You really need to get people comfortable. That's a space that they're safe in. I would have thought school time spent in outdoor education is very valuable. So that's one of the mistakes that the government's made, but it's made a few others as well.
Do you think that could be addressed at the select committee stage, or you think they're pretty set on taking it out?
I'm not sure what extent they're consulting on outdoor education. Certainly the Outdoors Education New Zealand organisation and a number of others are very strong. I think they're presenting a petition to Parliament on the 21st of October. I'm definitely going to try and make it there, say a few words if I can. We'll do what we can to resist that. I've had a good chat with Lawrence Shunan, our education spokesperson, who's very active and very well connected in education. But also, if you just think of the state of our outdoors, DOC is already underfunded. There's never enough money for conservation and tracks and so on. And this government's cut it by hundreds of millions of dollars. There's been a little bit of a band-aid from the International Visitor Levy. That has been helpful both for some of the infrastructure and some of the funding of backcountry. But it's also, when they increased the amount, they opened up for different uses of that IVL, like marketing. Now, marketing should not be coming out of that budget.
So do you have a perspective on, so funding increase to DOC, how much of it should be going on biodiversity and conservation versus the tracks and the huts and more the recreational side of things?
I think DOC can make the best use of the money if they do involve volunteers. And the Backcountry Trust is one example, but also we've got the Greater Wellington Backcountry Network that do an amazing amount of work on the tracks in the Tararuas and the Orongorongas and so on. They're supported by DOC, so they will get perhaps flown in with all of the tools and the equipment, and then they donate their time. There's so many predator-free groups now. I'm really hoping that the predator-free strategy refresh will come out strong. I really hope it includes feral cats because they're such a threat to our biodiversity. The dotterels on the coast, the rifleman, the titipunamu, all of these different birds are very vulnerable. I've got a bit of a passion for lizards myself, which is a good thing because they live in our house. But I don't think there's enough work being done on monitoring. There's quite a lot of, they say there's more than 4,000 species in New Zealand at risk of extinction, threatened or at risk of extinction. But there's an awful lot that are data deficient. We just don't know. Looking for skinks and geckos is a tricky business unless they're like our ones, which choose to live in the cupboards and the sheds and so forth.
What can we do to make the tramping environment sustainable going forward? The impact of social media, particularly Instagram, on particular huts, and there's a lot of pressure on certain parts of the network. And then there's also the backcountry. So how do we get that balance, and what can we do to try and make sure that future generations can enjoy what we've enjoyed without having that over-tourism challenge, which a lot of countries have had, and actually in New Zealand on a number of our Great Walks, for example, are very difficult to book because they're so popular.
In a way, the Great Walks are well managed through that booking system. But we can't do that everywhere, and we shouldn't do that everywhere. I think there are some real issues about Tourism New Zealand has only got funding for overseas marketing, and I think we are missing the opportunity to get our domestic tourists out to the regions in different seasons and to find the little gems that if you're on a 2-week blast through New Zealand, you just won't get to. But the domestic tourists are good for going tramping, going biking, whether it's kayaking or, dare I say, occasionally jet boating. These are people that we could get to the areas that need the economic development and are not overrun. I think there is room for making some better connections to towns. At the moment, you have to get a shuttle or drive yourself to the road ends, and perhaps we could have a better system for booking something that would drop people off and pick them up. Again, something in the Lake District, they've got a little minibus that does various circuits. And again, when we did the route burn, we were picked up at the other end. There's things like that would make quite a big difference.
What's your perspective on more of a user pays approach to the backcountry, whether it's through increased hut fees, particularly if they're on the booking system, or people having to pay to enter?
In general, I don't support it. I think there's perhaps a few hot spots where it may be appropriate. And I think the issue where overseas tourists pay and locals don't is a reasonable response, given that we're paying our taxes. What I find frustrating is that DOC is being forced to go out and look for philanthropic funding, which is getting scarcer anyway. And they're in competition with walking festivals, with trapping groups, with all of the other groups that are doing good environmental things that need funding. And I do wish Judith Collins had to go out and ask for donations for her Seahawk helicopters rather than DOC having to go out with a begging bowl.
On the topic of Parliament, have you come across many other MPs who are trampers? Do you think there's an affinity there in the House?
Yes, I think there are some outdoor people. Some of them tend to be the hunting and fishing group, but that still gets them out into the backcountry. There's some mountaineers, and there's definitely some keen trampers. Chloe was up the Tararuas ranges not too long ago, and there's some very keen outdoors people. I was very fortunate to be able to go earlier this year on a 4-day hikoi. I went with Graham Atkins, who's a marvellous conservationist. He led us up into the Rokuma range behind Hikara to see what the effect had been of 1080, because the forest was dying. It was dying from the top because of the possum browse, and it was dying from the bottom because of huge numbers of deer. And he was so excited to see the new shoots coming away and rata flowering. I was privileged to go to a forest bird hui on the west coast, and we went up to the Denniston Plateau, and I saw just how precious that is. And it was one of those wonderful slow walks with botanists. You can actually stop and look and take lots of pictures. And I met a most beautiful plant, one of the carnivorous plants, a sundew. Beautiful little pink number that, again, very few places in New Zealand would have things like that. So I think we need to protect. It's not just the underfunding of DOC, missing out outdoor education. The whole fast-track mining and conservation land is the opposite of what biodiversity needs, but it's also the opposite of what overseas tourists want to see.
Agreed. There's definitely a reality check between the images you see overseas and then when people arrive and if they see those impacts on the landscape. And particularly, it's always the places that tend to have the mining tend to have the tourists. The West Coast, it's half conservationists, it's half miners. There's quite a strong tension there.
Yeah, and of course we have to have a transition for good jobs so that people are not abandoned. But we're seeing in the old industrial jobs awful things because of the prices of electricity, with the mills closing and whole towns almost becoming centres of unemployment, and we can't have that. So I am pleased that the Greens have got a good industrial strategy with transition for jobs from the more extractive to the more caring and productive.
And it's great that we've actually got some examples of that. Blackpool was a classic dying West Coast town, and it's pretty booming, and all off the back of that tourism, which you say probably is largely domestic and a bit of international.
Revitalising jobs in that area is really important, but we also have to make sure that those tourism jobs are not just the lowest paid. We need to make sure that there's added value and that they're year round. It was a pleasure to see quite a few people on the old Ghost Road in the middle of winter. It was a great tramp to do among the icicles in September. And there's a lot of places that we need to focus with the locals on creating enjoyable places to go and places for people to spend their money.
So do you have, probably a bit busy at the moment, but do you have a bucket list of trips that you want to do in the future?
I think it's growing faster than I'm able to do them. And I like the long trips. I did the Sounds to Sounds in 2023, and that took me to some really interesting places. But I also found it quite hard going over the Omarama saddle, so I've then bought an e-bike since. So I quite like to do some longer trips on the e-bike. I'm very keen on both sea kayaking and pack rafting. So I've got quite a few on my list of things to do. What it has done is, being in this busy job, is it's focused me on things that are close at hand. So people probably don't realise how beautiful the Hutt Gorge is. Just near Upper Hutt. Te Awa Kairangi goes through pristine forest and gorges where you don't see anybody. It's good. Look at what's local before you go too far.
Excellent. And then just to finish up with, do you have a specific trip planned?
I've actually got a trip planned for Labour weekend. It's a mixture of kayaking and walking. I'm taking the kayak on the ferry and I'm kayaking up to Bloomin Island, which is a pest-free reserve in the Marlborough Sounds, and looking forward to walking around the island and listening for birds and hoping that the wind will be in my favour both ways.
Thank you so much for listening to The Tramping Life. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please follow the podcast in whatever app you use. Tell a friend about it and consider leaving a rating or a review. It really helps more people discover the show. If you have any questions or feedback, I'd love to hear from you. Drop me an email at thetrampinglife, one word, @gmail.com.